As they gather in Birmingham for their annual conference, if the Tories think it's business as usual, select a new leader and be in the running for power at the next election, they can think again. This once great party, which gave us Winston Churchill, who defeated Hitler and saved the free world, and Margaret Thatcher, who liberated the working class and turned Britain into a global military, diplomatic and economic superpower, well, that same party is now in a death spiral. But speak to any corduroy-clad Conservative today over a large gin and tonic, and they'll bore you to tears about how the Tory party is the most successful political movement in the history of modern democracy. Well, they were, but not anymore. That was then, and this is now. Margaret Thatcher would be spinning in her grave if she saw what her party had become. Do you think she would have signed up to legal net migration of 250,000 people a year? Do you think she would have signed up for the highest tax burden since the war? Would Margaret Thatcher have inflicted those illiberal, authoritarian and ruinous lockdowns on the country, which even Boris Johnson, in his bombshell new book, has admitted didn't work? Do me a favour. Would Margaret Thatcher have tolerated the left-wing ideological capture of our public institutions, all of which happened on the watch of the Conservatives, with kids having their private parts chopped off in the name of inclusion, schools and universities teaching our children that this country is shameful, and the words mother or woman removed from NHS literature about the menopause or pregnancy? She might have had a pair of balls, but Margaret Thatcher would have killed this trans madness stone dead. Do you think that Margaret Thatcher, as a trained scientist, would have signed up for net zero, given the experimental nature of these new technologies, the enormous economic and societal cost, and the fact that half the world isn't even doing net zero, a half of the world that includes China, a hateful totalitarian regime who seek to be the dominant economic superpower of the future? Now, the Conservative Party is an iconic institution and has done infinitely more good than bad. And it may do so again. I hope it does. But right now, the Tory party is a hollow shell of its former self. I've got to tell you, at this stage, for the Conservatives, it is now damage limitation. Because the Reform UK genie is out of the bottle and it's not going back in. Whilst Labour, for all of their problems, are predominantly the main party of the left in this country, the Tories must now share votes on the right with one Nigel Paul Farage. They've done this to themselves, of course, over 14 long years of broken promises, squandered opportunities, and a noticeable and inexplicable shift to the left. The Tory party is now the party of centrist dads, Blairites and glorified Liberal Democrats. Their legacy in power: a bloated welfare bill, a profligate but ever-worsening health service, a worklessness crisis, low growth, low productivity, cheap foreign labour, overflowing prisons, lawlessness on the streets, the boats, no houses. It's a shambles. It tells you everything you need to know that the truly abysmal Theresa May began Britain's reckless adventure with net zero, even though her then Chancellor Philip Hammond warned her that it would cost at least £1 trillion. This is the same Theresa May who recently declared that she's proudly woke. Well, this complacent party needs to wake up. The first step is to elect a leader who is a true Conservative, who will police the borders, reduce legal immigration, and get legal immigration to a level that serves the economy but doesn't destroy society. A leader who accelerates Rishi Sunak's sensible move away from the worst excesses of net zero. A leader who gets taxes down, supports businesses and grows the economy. And the new leader is going to have to build a relationship and form a soft political coalition with Nigel Farage and Reform UK. Because the Tories are now like an ailing business that will only survive with a merger. Why? Well, because the maths just don't add up. With Reform's 4.1 million votes at the last election, which I promise you will grow, the Conservatives have no hope of forming an overall majority without Reform's support. A sobering thought as the Tories fill the bars and nightclubs of Birmingham this evening. I've got no doubt that Margaret Thatcher will be celebrated at party conference this year, as she is every year, and rightly so. But would a young Margaret Thatcher now join this current Conservative Party? It's my honest view that the Iron Lady would probably be a Reform UK supporter. She would probably vote for Reform, she would probably campaign for them, and she would likely seek to serve them as leader if she were around today. And that is truly damning. Love them or hate them, Reform UK are looking like the real Conservatives now. It may be their party conference this week, but the party's over for the Tories. Conference. Are the Tories in denial about the threat of Nigel Farage and indeed Reform UK? And would a young Margaret Thatcher now join Reform rather than the Conservatives? Are Reform the real Conservatives? Let's get the views of my top pundits this evening. Daily Express icon, Carol Malone.
I've gone to an icon. I'm got
soon to be icon. He's working on it. He's definitely the eye candy tonight. He is journalist and broadcaster Benjamin Budsworth, who only needed about 30 seconds in makeup because he's naturally...
He had the only 30 seconds that were available, but anyway.
And then let me tell you, this man doesn't need any adjectives because he's a knight of the realm. He is Sir Jake Berry, former chairman of the Conservative Party. I've got to come to you first, Jake. Is your party in denial about the threat of Nigel Farage and the small matter of 4.1 million votes in July?
So I thought the really interesting thing about the Vox Pops that we just saw from the amazing GBNews party, and it would reflect my experience of being in Birmingham the last few days, is I do think there is a bit of a problem that the Conservatives have come together feeling good because Keir Starmer is doing badly. That is not the same thing as us doing well. And I think that's a bit of an issue, but we can't solve that issue until we have a new leader to unite behind. And picking up on something Carol said right at the top of the show about this should be a conference to end all conferences. We have all sorts of announcements. You simply cannot have those without a new leader in place. So query the logic of dragging the leadership election out longer than all the episodes of The Last of the Summer Wine put together, dragging the leadership election out till the day before the American presidential election. That probably wasn't the smartest thing to do. But we are where we are, and so we are having a good debate about who should be leader, but there are no policies, there's no announcements, there's no direction, there's no one to follow, and I don't think that's a good spot to find yourself in.
You're the former party chairman. Would you have moved the date forward? I mean, there was speculation in the Mail this weekend that it could happen in the last week of October. Is that going to happen? Would you have pushed for that?
Well, I'm pretty sure it won't happen. It strikes me as something absolutely should happen, but I'm fairly sure it won't. Look, I'm out, so I've got no influence on it. But it seems to me bizarre that Rishi Sunak is going to respond to the budget and then, I guess, no longer be on the front bench just a matter of days later. It would be an amazing opportunity for whoever he or she may be, the new leader of the Conservative Party, to get there in front of Keir Starmer and give him a really difficult time over what's clearly going to be a very difficult budget for everyone in the country, not least the Labour Party.
Benjamin, you're on the left, but as an observer, do you identify Reform UK as the true Conservatives now?
Well, I think the Conservatives have spent all summer, if anyone's been paying attention, and I'm not sure they have, but they keep talking about immigration. And actually, I'll compliment Sir Jake with saying this in an ad break. But if they're saying that you need someone that's going to be tough on immigration, well, then that's going to send people over to Reform rather than to the Conservatives. And I think that they're then trying to be a right-wing party rather than a centre-right party, which is the only position they've ever won from. However, I think, Reform doesn't have the organisation still. I'm not convinced it has the discipline. But if you look at those red wall seats, about 80 of them, they came second to Labour. So I think what you're seeing, and Sir John Curtis said this over the weekend, is that the death of the two-party system is what the last election revealed. And I think it makes it a really complicated job for whoever's going to be Tory leader. Now, I would disagree with what's just been said, because I actually think they should have a long leadership election as they are, because look, it doesn't matter what political points you score at this point in a 5-year parliament. It's frankly irrelevant. It's not going to change the result at the next general election. What might change it is if they have a serious conversation about what the Tory party means. But they haven't had that.
Labour are lucky. They don't have the equivalent of Reform biting at their ankles, do they? Do you think the Tories are in denial?
Yes, I do. And I think that they've got to stop talking about reform. Kemi Badenoch today said reform aren't real Conservatives. Nobody thought they were. And she said they're not serious people. Stop talking about them. Stop looking to them.
Making them important.
Yes, fix your own party first and leave them alone. Stop criticising them because it makes you look weak. Makes reform look like a threat, and the Tories think they're a threat. I mean, you asked a question before about, would Maggie Thatcher go to reform if she was alive today? And I don't believe she would, because I believe the Tories wouldn't be in the mess they're in today if Margaret Thatcher...
She wouldn't have let the Tories sort of drift into
She would not have allowed
the
the infighting that has destroyed the party. The infighting that is still happening today and has been happening over the past 2 days with Jenrick and Badenoch. And Badenoch was saying she's been misinterpreted, misquoted, all the rest of it, by Jenrick's crew. So, I think Thatcher would not have let all these factions split within the Tory
And if
party.
a young Margaret Thatcher, aged 22, was stuffing envelopes now, would she be stuffing them for the Conservatives or Reform?
Or she'd be stuffing them for the Conservatives. She was about as true a Conservative.
Even this rather woke
I
think she'd probably be sending emails these days. Even the Conservative Party's moved on.
She wouldn't have liked sort of vegan, plant-based, sort of woke Tory Party 2.0, would she?
Well, I think what Margaret Thatcher did when she came into power, and the Conservative Party was actually a much more centrist party than it was under her leadership. She came in and said, actually, I don't think this party's right. I think Britain wants something different. And as our first female Prime Minister, she transformed the Conservative Party and Britain in her own image.
And it took her about 5 years to
fix the Tory
didn't
party,
it?
So I think that's a bit... But it's not right to compare what the Conservative Party was like while she was Prime Minister or as she stopped being Prime Minister. It's much better to say... you had a party, frankly, in a mess, reeling from a series of bad election results, and an amazing leader came in and transformed it and, transformed Britain. And that can happen again. That can happen again.
What you don't have now, Jake, is the Thatcher in the wings to come. Because none of those four...
But no one knew Margaret Thatcher would be the Margaret Thatcher that she was until she became leader.
This is clearly heating up.